to our March edition of Deep Dive with Revoice. I am Becca Mason, and tonight we have with us Tish Warren, who is absolutely delightful, and she's coming to us from her absolutely delightful southern sitting room outside of Austin, Texas.
It's not mine. It's my mom's.
Borrowing from her mother.
Just to be clear.
That's right.
I would
that is not Tish's wallpaper.
Sitting room.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So, but what we are planning on talking about tonight, as y'all know, those of you that have been with us for each of our deep dives, every month we are looking specifically at things that have to do with either discipleship or ministry or community, looking at the values that are a part of Revoice, and really giving y'all an opportunity to hear from people that is part of their heart in the ministry that they do, is giving people an opportunity to hear on a little deeper level than what you would normally get if you just came to the conference once a year or things like that. So our hope is to be able to extend some of that learning that you get to do at the conference throughout the year with our monthly webinars. And so this year, we're really focusing on the idea of discipleship and what are the things that we need to just understand how to do specifically as side B Christians, but really for just Christianity in general. How do you walk a daily walk with Christ? And it was one of the funny things after the conference this past summer. I had several friends that were able to watch because it was all online for the first time. And that was a comment that I heard over and over again was, this was so great. I mean, I'm straight and I still got so much out of it because our focus was on discipleship. And I was like, yeah, it's amazing how for discipleship, it kind of applies to everybody.
Wow.
But I know.
We have so much in common.
It's amazing. Yeah. So what we're really looking forward to tonight is hearing from you, Tish, really about what that has to do a little bit with your own walk of kind of how you have ended up where you are in your walk with Jesus, and how that has ended up getting you to this place of really a lot of multitasking now, being a writer in residence at your church in Austin, and how you've gone from Presbyterian to being in the ACNA and what that looks like for you. So we'd love to hear a little bit about that from you, kind of where you've ended up and how you got here, and kind of how that leads into your book. So we'll kind of start that segue of a little bit of tell us about Tish and how you got to write Prayer in the Night.
Yeah. So like my life story in 5 minutes or something.
Oh, I mean, like 15 or 20. Yeah, just go for it.
All right. So I am from Texas. I grew up, till I was 12, I lived in a small town, and then I lived in Austin, Texas, where I did not wear Laura Ashley. And I grew up Southern Baptist. Actually, did you know that? Before I was Presbyterian, I was Baptist.
Nice.
So
see, I understand that track. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of us. So I was baptized actually twice in the Southern Baptist Church, double dunked.
As all of us were as well.
Yes. As an Anglican, I have to tell you that you were only baptized once.
That's right.
You kind of got wet in front of other people the rest of the time. But yeah, so I what can I say about myself? I mean, I was a churchy kid, man. I came to Jesus relatively young. I was around 10. And it took like a minute, and he meant it. And I had, of course, so much I didn't know as a child, but I knew that I had seen something real in God, and who he was in Christ and the way that I saw people who were followers of Jesus walk with Jesus. And so I wanted that. And God, I think, saved me at a young age because he knew I'd need it. I think there was some hard stuff growing up that I felt like I kind of fell back on, knowing that Jesus was my father and my friend. And so that's the beautiful part of it. And I think the shadow side of that is I was very serious about my faith, had the WWJD bracelets or whatever. It's different. I have to say, and I should say specifically in the context of Revoice, that I have a different story than a lot of people because my parents weren't fundamentalist. So like they're Baptist, but they like drink, and my dad smoked, and they love to dance, and so I didn't like, I never kissed dating goodbye, and I didn't have, sorry. Hey, thank you. My husband's bringing me water. So I don't have some of the like baggage from evangelicalism and fundamentalism. I have my own kind of baggage, but I don't feel like deeply wounded by a lot of that. And so, I mean, there's some there's some parts that weren't great, but we were not, there's a lot of Christian culture from like the 80s and 90s that I wasn't part of. So like I didn't know who James Dobson was. So I did eventually, but like not on my own. So all that to say, I'm grateful. It felt like I wanted to know Jesus, and I wasn't inoculated against that, which is a mercy.
Yes, very much so.
But I also was a good kid and a churchy kid and got good grades and stuff. So I think that myself as a sinner was mostly theoretical to me. That was a theoretical concept. And so it wasn't really until college that I started failing in some more overt ways, but also just asking some theological questions, coming to understand sin differently. So sin wasn't just sort of like intentional, willful things we kind of choose to do, but is much more kind of the water we swim in, the shape of our heart bent inward, right? And so, but through kind of a discovery of my own sin in college, I encountered, through my discovery of my own sin, but also through the church I was at, just Redeemer, Winston-Salem, I discovered, and that was a PCA church, the doctrines of grace. And grace has just completely transformed my world. I can't explain it other than that my world was very black and white, and grace it became technicolor.
Yeah.
And it's still the thing I can't get over. I mean, it's just, grace is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it's the thing that is the most shocking to me about the Christian faith on the regular. So kind of through that, I ended up, the joke I make is, I asked John Calvin to come into my heart, and ended up in a Presbyterian church for a while. And I know there's plenty of Baptists with John Calvin in their heart now, but that didn't exist when I was younger. I didn't even know there was a Reformed Baptist thing.
Yeah, that was not an option when we were young.
So then, well, okay, I'm just gonna sort of like skip, like there's a bunch of little steps in here. I was like slightly emergent for a while. I went to Scum of the Earth Church for a summer, and got, and this is still important, but like got very drawn into the scriptures about about God's heart for the poor and for justice. I I got a real passion um, for. I mean, now it's called social justice. At the time, I would have just called it justice or ministry to the poor, ministry of compassion, or concern about marginalization and inequality. And so I worked with churches for a while, mostly kind of resource churches, like middle income to wealthy churches, kind of trying to connect them to um, the needs in their own community, not
Nice.
like in their own city. Um, so so I was in the PCA for a while, and then to make a very long story short, went to seminary and wasn't going to get ordained because I was not for women's ordination, and I was in the PCA. And in the process of seminary, my husband was writing a paper on the famous Timothy passage of authenticity, about women should not preach and have authority. And in the process of writing that paper and researching it, he changed his mind on women's ordination. So he became for women's ordination about a year and change before I did, year and a few months. And it was just a lot of us arguing about it and talking about it. And um, yeah. And then we accidentally became Anglican around this time. We never meant to.
Yeah.
We couldn't find a PCA. We were like in an in-between spot in our life when my husband was applying for PhD programs, and we we couldn't find a PCA church for various reasons. So we started going to this Anglican church, and it was just this sweet little tiny Episcopal evangelical church,
Mm.
and it that I cried every week. The liturgy was so captivating and healing to me
Mm.
and transformative. So we tried to go back to a PCA church. We just couldn't do it. Like we just couldn't go somewhere without the Sanctus every week. Uh, the church went back to when we moved had like a 45-minute sermon. We were like, no, we can't do that anymore. Like, we're not, it's all right.
We
But
love John Calvin, but not that much anymore.
I don't want to have to bring snacks to get through the sermon. And but yeah, I said to have the Eucharist every week. I had to have the liturgy. I had to have the Gloria. And um, so anyway, we became Anglican, and then my husband and I both ended up becoming Anglican priest. I had no intention to be a writer at all. That's sort of a whole other story that just sort of accidentally happened. I've loved writing for a lot of my life, but I didn't consider it something that people can do. From a very practical Texas family, so saying I want to be a writer would be like, I want to be a baseball player. Like, great,
Right.
that's good for you. But it just kind of that has unfolded, and that's the primary thing I do now is for my job is write. But I'm an Anglican priest, and I serve it as writer in residence at Resurrection South Austin. So I preach there. And we just moved to Austin like a month ago. So I'm from here, moved away. I've lived all over. And then I'll just say as a side note, I mean, I was, I don't know, I'm not quite sure how I ended up on Revoice Advisory Council.
To say that was one thing I was going to ask was kind of how that
Yeah.
journey came about.
Well, so here's what I was going to say is that from at least college, Christians, and I'll say it this way because this is how we would have said it in college, like Christians who struggle with same-sex attraction or Christians who are same-sex attracted have been very, very close friends of mine, like very close, like my best friend and several of my best friends. And so I've just walked with people who I love deeply, who are at this point like part of my family that
Yeah.
that are gay, and was um I think that we ended up being a little bit periphery to the, like, on the edge of the ex-gay movement, just because we were Christians in the late 90s trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to think about this stuff, and that was kind of what was happening then.
Yeah.
But it was at the collapse of it. It was at the tail end of it. And I think honestly, even then, my kind of crew had enough of a robust version of sin, understanding of sin, going back to this theology of sin,
Yeah.
that there were parts of it, even then, that we didn't kind of buy, or we were skeptical of. Like, it just didn't. Um, I felt, here's what I'll say: I'm by no means an expert on ex-gay stuff, and I was not asked to be part of the advisory council because I am an expert on this. But um, uh, but it often tried to make um, uh, like struggle with sin, like sexual, or I could at least say disordered desire, disordered sexual desire, have this real tidy explanation, right? It's because of your dad, or it's because of this thing that happened to you, or um and it was all very it felt like sin management instead of like true, like, transformation of life and heart. So
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
then we were a little skeptical, but didn't really know what a response was. I mean, this was everyone, it felt like, was still figuring this out. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
talking, this is like 98, 99. But our church, our local church had was really trying to think well about this, and had some openly gay celibate folks. And so this has always kind of been part of my life and ministry. And I mean, some of my very, very best friends in the world are, I'm not saying, like, I'm not going to name them because I don't know, they're like part of the Revoice community, but I don't know how, I don't know what they want me to say or not say about our relationship, and I didn't get a chance to ask. But I'll say this has just been a huge um gay celibate Christians have been some of the most significant people in my life. And honestly, I have some also very, very close friends, longtime friends that are side A, that are not celibate, and we deeply disagree, and we've openly disagreed and talked about that. But in terms of kind of people who have discipled me, people who have walked with me, people that I know Jesus more because of them, um, that's some particular side B folks in my life. I mean, I can say hands down, the very most helpful, life-changing parenting advice that I've gotten in my life is from a single childless man. Um, and uh, it's not because he knows a lot about kids. It's because when I was a young mom, I had lots of people to tell me about, which brand of diaper to use, but I needed
Yeah.
people reminding me of how the gospel changed parenting, um, how the love of Jesus was an actual, like, real thing that would make a difference in my kid's life, not just their nap schedule, right?
Yeah.
Not just,
Yeah.
it was like something about him being out of that world actually allowed him to see the way the gospel impacted parenting in a
Yeah.
much more deep way than I could when I was so, like, immersed in it. And the most helpful thing for my marriage has been side B folks in my life, just who we love and walk with. And so, but what's weird to me is I'm not sure that the advisory council knew that. I don't know. I don't know why you guys asked me, but so I don't know how like I just feel like side B Christians, gay celibate Christians thinking about sexuality, even in my own life, thinking about sexuality and sin and grace has been a huge part of my story since the late 90s. And but I don't know how you guys knew that. Maybe you knew. Maybe you just got a vibe.
I was going to
Got
say,
like
I
a
think,
side
I
B
think
vibe.
Nate may have gotten a vibe from a mutual friend. So that's probably
Yeah.
how that happened, because that was before I joined the team. So I had kind of wondered if there was a specific story that went along with that or not. But we are certainly glad that you are on the advisory council now, and it is a blessing to hear somebody that is in a marriage that has kids be able to just talk about how your gay celibate friends have had such an impact on those two ways that you interact with your family.
I mean, I bring those up, like they've in general, I would say, just had an impact on how I walk with Jesus, period.
Yeah.
Whether I was married or not. But I brought those up specifically because that would be something that some folks would say, okay, well, like you can't speak into that, or you have, but I feel like really it's yeah, but I would say that's been the most significant kind of encouragement in those areas of my life have been from side B folks.
Absolutely. And it's encouraging to hear that there are straight people in the church that recognize those specific types of impact that their side B friends can have in their lives. That's been an ongoing conversation for probably the last year or so, specifically in some of our side B groups and things that we discuss at Revoice as well, that there are very specific and unique things that celibate gay Christians can bring to the table in our churches, because our life situations give us a perspective that's quite different from what you're going to get from straight people, single or married, in the church, that it just adds another perspective and another opportunity to be able to see things in a specific way. And it's just encouraging to see that there are people that do recognize that. Sounds a little bit like that type of relationship, being able to remind us of the gospel in those everyday things was a little bit of inspiration for your first book. It's a little centered around finding those everyday things to be
I'll make a
moments of
transition.
holiness.
I want to make a theological point and it'll help you. It'll tee up the talk about the second book.
Excellent.
Which is that I think the overall thing is that, I mean, it's funny, right? Because there's been so much conversation about identity in the Revoice world, and like have your identity in Christ and don't have your identity in anything else. And what does it mean to have identity in Christ? And this is such an ongoing conversation, but I think because the people who we hang out with, because the people that lead our churches, because the way we think about what motherhood is or marriage is, that it can be that our identity as single or married or having children or not or whatever, that those things kind of shape who we hang out with or who we learn from even. And I guess what I'm saying by bringing this up is like, if marriage is my chief identity, if parenting is my chief identity, then in some ways I can't be discipled by people outside of that, right? But I'm saying like the most significant forms of discipleship in my life have been from some side B folks. And so why is that? Well, it's it's because at the end of the day, the most significant thing about their life and the most significant thing about my life is that we are beloved in Jesus and learning how
Yeah.
to walk in that belovedness every day. So I'm saying that it's I'm not trying to get into the identity stuff. I'm really not, but I'm saying that there's something about the reality that um, discipleship isn't formed by our stage of life. It's not
Right.
formed by whether we're married or not. It's not formed by, of course, God, that's like part of the story of sanctification in our life. But at the end of the day, um, I receive the gospel from people who have the gospel as the center of their life. And
Right.
if those people are gay, then I receive the gospel from folks that are gay. And if those folks are um, parents, then I receive, or not parents, then I receive the gospel in parenting, even, and about parenting from them. So it's because the people that and I am not saying all side B people have their deepest identity in Jesus, because they don't. And this is a place that needs to grow, just as
Yeah,
it is for straight people or
exactly.
any people who've never even heard of side B or whatever. But I am saying that the particular people in my life, I was able to receive from them because what they gave me was the gospel,
Yeah.
right? They didn't give me their identity. I didn't give they gave me their identity, but they didn't give me their identity as side B people.
Yeah.
Of course, they gave that to me in the same way that like my black friends are black friends, and that's part of their gift to me. But it wasn't the primary thing that drew me in. It's that these people love Jesus and walk in the
Yeah.
joy of Jesus, and I want that, right?
Yeah.
And I want that too. So, I think the depth of relationship I've had with folks who have different have different lives than me points to the shared identity in Jesus. That's what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
I
And
like it.
shared identity of Jesus um, is to some extent what the my prayer in the night is about. In that it's about where is God when we where is God when we suffer?
Yeah.
Where's like is having Jesus, is being beloved of Jesus going to take our sin and struggle away?
Yeah. And it is a beautiful piece of writing that came about at an absolutely providential time, that in the midst of a year of kind of universal suffering and wondering and having time to just experience so much loss and having difficult ways of attempting to process that, to have this work come out for me was incredibly helpful, and refreshing to be able to see, from someone who is just now seeing the beauty of liturgy and of understanding this.
Mm.
I've spent so much time in Southern Baptist world where, it's appalling to read somebody else's prayer. I mean, why would you should be able to speak your own mind to God.
Yeah.
And to realize that we have this rich history in the church of thousands upon thousands of people who have experienced so many things, from joy to loss to grief to whatever, that have left this just treasure trove of, here are ways that you can communicate with God when you don't know what to do. And the last couple of years, I've really been drawn to that aspect of liturgy, and bought a copy of the Book of Common Prayer, and joked about having to hide it from my dad, who's a Southern Baptist pastor. And that being able to see how you can lean in on people. I'll have to tell you, this is the funny thing, talking about moving through denominations and things, that when I first was attempting to tell my parents that I was gay, I was leading up to that by kind of explaining some things. And part of it was that I had been going to a kind of counseling and ministry center that was mainly supported by PCA churches. And so I said that I had been working with this PCA organization and had gotten some really good discipleship and had been a part of this and been a part of that, had been doing this. And I like just beat around the bush with my dad for like 25 minutes. And he was like, so are you trying to tell me that you're gay? And I was like, yes, that is what I'm trying to tell you. And he went, good. Because at first I thought you were going to tell me that you'd become Presbyterian, and that was more than I could handle. So he was like, we can handle gay, but I'm really not sure that Presbyterian was something that we could do. And I was like, oh, yay. So
oh, like, that's a great story.
Yeah, I was like, thank you for breaking the tension with some humor, because I really don't know what I'm doing right now. So that's been our joke for years now, is that if there's something I'm trying to tell him, I'm like, I'm still not becoming Presbyterian. I promise. He's like, okay, that's fine. As long as we're still okay with that, we're good. But that's always people are like, how do you tell your parents? I was like, well, at first I let my dad think I was going to be Presbyterian, and then the gay thing was no big deal.
First tell them you're becoming Presbyterian.
That's right. Yeah. It always used to be the joke that you tell your parents that you were pregnant, and then whatever else you were really going to tell them wasn't so bad. But apparently pregnant was not nearly as scary as being Presbyterian or anything like that. But looking at how,
that's a great story.
I know, it's so much fun. My dad's great. Excuse me. But looking at how that structure and framework is something to lean on in those times when you don't know what to say, that yes, the Holy Spirit gives us utterings when we don't know. He prays on our behalf, but it's also nice to have those things and those structures around us, that when we don't know what to pray and we don't know what to say to God, that we can see what have other people said and done in these situations. So tell us a little bit, for those who have not seen or heard about Prayer in the Night yet, what it is about exactly.
Yeah. So Prayer in the Night is started in a really hard year of my own life. So in 2017, we moved from Austin to Pittsburgh for a new job. And then a week later, after we moved, my dad back in Texas passed away suddenly. And so I had a plane ticket bought to go home to visit him for his birthday, and I used it to go speak at his funeral. And it was heartbreaking. And the next day, we found out I was pregnant, which my husband and I had wanted for a long time. So that was exciting and complex, and I was crying and laughing, and it was all because, my dad had died the week before. So it was confusing. And then 3 weeks later, I miscarried pretty dramatically. So that's where the book picks up, is in the emergency room with this kind of miscarriage. And so then we actually got pregnant again a month later, and then over a long time, it was it was a hard pregnancy, and several months of just kind of being in and out of the emergency room. I had to go on bed rest for a little bit, or a form of it, medically restricted activity. And then we lost that baby, a son, in July of that year. And so at the end of that time, it wasn't like unheard of horror, right? It wasn't. In some ways, these are ordinary things. Like, all of us, if we live long enough, will lose a parent. 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. A lot of us move across the country and lose friends and feel lonely, and feel homesick. And but it was just, at the end of that 6 months, I was spiritually exhausted. I was weary. And I felt like I didn't know how to pray. Because questions of what theologians call theodicy, which is the idea of kind of how can a God be all good and all powerful and bad things still happen in the world, kind of cropped up again. And it wasn't so much that they cropped up intellectually. I mean, I was ordained at this point. I was a pastor in a church. I'd been to seminary, but I just found them deeply emotionally unsatisfying. And so what I say in the book, and what I think is true, is that theodicy is not only kind of a philosophical or theological question, it's really an ache of the human heart. It's this deep, deep desire to see God at work, to believe that there is a God who sees us, who knows us, and who acts on our behalf. And so ultimately it's a longing for Jesus to make things new, and a longing that that we have to bear, that we have to endure. And so I talk about until Jesus finally makes all things new, right? And until we are no longer in the already and not yet. So I talk in the book about well, Flannery O'Connor said that evil or sin or the problem of pain, however you want to talk about this, is not primarily a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be endured. And so I talk about how do we endure that mystery, right? And so, I mean, some of this is through the story of Jesus. It's through the doctrines we believe, right? It's through this story of the Christian faith that grounds creation, fall, redemption, restoration, that grounds our life. We find our own life story in these stories, in the story of God's redemptive work through history. But how do we enter into that story? Like, it can't just be another doctrine in our head. I think particularly when we feel like we've got nothing, like when faith has run dry, when we can't like conjure up some kind of spiritual or emotional experience, we need the gospel, the story of the Christian faith, Christian life, to be a room outside of us that we can walk into, and that is sturdy enough to hold us up, right? Is sturdy enough to carry us. And so my book is sort of how do we endure that mystery? What are the practices of the church and the ways of faith that allow us to continue walking in the way of Jesus? And prayer is chief of those, right? Prayer is among those. And so it's kind of a book about how I was able to learn to pray when I couldn't pray. And I say in the book, I was a priest that couldn't pray, which is bad for the gig, right? It's not good. Right. But it was the prayers of the church that led me back into prayer, but that led me back into, because what was underneath, I mean, of course I could say words to God. What's underneath all of that is, do I trust God? And that was the question. In this book, I was writing, and I wrote this question that's in the second chapter, which is, so if we can't trust God to keep bad things from happening to us, how do we trust God at all? And I didn't have an answer. I stopped writing for like a week. And I was like, I don't have anything to say. I don't know. I can answer this, but I can't answer this in a way that is satisfying to me, that in a way that satisfies me, my emotions. That doesn't feel like a pat answer or something you'd put on the, let go and let God or whatever. Right. So the rest of the book is me kind of wrestling with that question. And so the book is sort of, how do we trust God and meet God in our human vulnerability, in the ways that we are weak, the ways that we are limited, the ways that we are struggling, the ways that we are mortal, the ways that we are going to suffer loss, and everyone around us will suffer loss. How do we meet God there? And because God doesn't take away our vulnerability, right? He doesn't rescue us from being vulnerable.
Right.
So that's the book in general.
It is fantastic.
But it's all framed around this one prayer in Compline, which is the Anglican nighttime prayer office, which, remember, I didn't grow up with said prayers either. Like
Yeah.
I had no idea. Like I don't think I was an adult. I was over 18 when I started praying, like received prayers from the church, except for maybe the Lord's Prayer. I mean, I knew the Lord's Prayer, but yeah, but anyway, so I'm fairly new at this as well, but we Anglicans pray this nighttime prayers. It's a long history in the church of praying prayers in the night. And so I Compline, when I couldn't pray, what kind of brought me back to prayer is Compline. And so I pull my one prayer that I really love, called the keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night. And every chapter of the book is framed around one phrase from that prayer. But it's not, so if you finish my book and you don't pray Compline, I'm fine with that. Like, it's not apologetic for Compline or how to pray Compline. It's framed around Compline a lot because of my own biography, right? My own story, my own interaction with that. But I do make a little bit of an apologetic in it for praying received prayers of the church.
Absolutely.
And having varied prayer practices. So the Baptist kind of, we speak to God and we always make it up. That's a great way to pray. I pray that way every day.
Yeah.
But there's other ways, like received prayer, also silent prayer, of course, praying the Psalms.
Yes.
Which has become more and more important. I mean, the Psalms were the first prayer book of the church.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the book.
It's beautiful. Yeah, that's been fun as I've had friends that have started reading it. That's the two responses that I get the most is like a first reaction is, oh my word, I want to be Anglican now. Or where do I find a copy of the Book of Common Prayer? Because for those of us that haven't just spent a lot of time around heavy liturgy like that, it is such a beautiful exposure to what those received prayers can look like in our lives. And so, we tend to be a little overreacting when it's like, I'm going to go find an Anglican church now. Like we can pray those things and stay where we are, which it's such a fantastic way. It's one of the things I love about our Revoice community in particular is that there are people from so many different traditions that we are able to share with one another and to see how all these different aspects of the faith really do work together in ways that are going to be beneficial for all of us. And so that is one thing that I really, really appreciated about reading the book, was being able to see and understand how those received prayers and how liturgy fits into just everyday life. I started out even in high school, I would at least go to either Christmas Mass with friends at the local Episcopal church, or had different opportunities. I went on Palm Sunday to a Catholic Mass with a friend in high school, which nobody had told me that that's like the longest service of the year in the Catholic Church, and we were there.
Don't tell your dad.
I know. So, I mean, like, from all these times of being able to just see these little bits and pieces of other church experiences, but always on like a Sunday morning. So being able to see that there is the structure and there is a rhythm that you can have in your life to be able to kind of reset those times. It was just incredibly helpful, especially in a year that it's felt like there has been no routine and no structure and no rhythm, to be able to see how to put that in my own life, using some structure from the church, has really been incredibly peace giving, for me, that just missing that structure of on Sunday mornings, we get up and go to church, that it's just different when you're sitting in the bed watching on YouTube, that there were ways that we could instill that type of structure and rhythm into our daily life, because I found these little gifts of liturgical practice and received prayers and things that we could do as a family, that have just helped keep us in a spiritual rhythm of life, which has been, it's been a real blessing.
Yeah, I love the prayer book and I mean, I think it would be great for people to get it. I will say, if you get it, ask a friend who has used it or was Anglican to kind of like help you figure it out. Because I had a friend that was like, I'm trying to read it from, like, just tried to read it cover to cover.
Right.
And I'm like, oh no, that's a disaster. Like, don't do that. It's not meant to be made. It's not meant even to be read like that anymore. It'll be awful. So, but yeah, the daily spirituality is a beautiful gift of the prayer book. And the original kind of intent was to take the monastic practices, right? This kind of constant rhythm of prayer every 3 hours during the day, and combine those and streamline those so that they are able to be prayed by the laity, by all the rest of us, right? That was kind of, I'm saying, like in the 16th century, when the prayer books were first starting written, there was a concept of sort of opening up monastic spiritual practices, a daily rhythm of prayer to everyone, that was really intentional. And I think that's a huge gift of rhythms of prayer.
Yeah, it's a great way to just kind of add a tool to your spiritual tool belt, that it's not a matter of one being right or wrong so much as here's a smattering and a gift of all these different ways, that this is just one more opportunity of things that you can add to the tools that you have for your daily spirituality, and just understanding what our relationship with the Lord can look like, in different ways, different situations.
And I would say even outside of this, I mean, I think there's just a lot of different ways to pray. Like I said, I brought up prayers of silence or specific. We could get into like the Jesus prayer that Orthodox pray, and these have been incredibly helpful for me. And like, when I only thought prayer was me talking to God, that was like my only understanding of prayer. I never knew what people meant when they talked about growing in prayer or growing in their prayer life. It just felt like giving more time, like having more quiet time. And then I'm almost like, there's a limit to that, right? Like at some point you got to like go to school and go to work. And so for me, growth in prayer has been learning different ways that the church has prayed. And I talk about in the book is like the painters use different colors of paint, different types of paint, different hues of paint. And artists, mixed media artists, even use other things. And so I'm saying, I think there are different ways to pray that are deeply Christian, that are from the tradition. And we can embrace all of them, right? And I think it was Justin Martyr said, everything good and true, everything true and beautiful belongs to us, right? And so I think we can say, if you're a Baptist, like, you still inherit the great tradition of the church, and so you can glean from it, and you can and if you're, and I think it goes both ways. Like, if you never ever pray extemporaneous prayer, like, try it, right? Because that's like a beautiful way of prayer. But
it's great.
So
absolutely. That's I mean, it's just getting that deeper understanding of growing in your prayer life doesn't mean you just talk to God longer, that it's different ways of being able to have that connection and to learn things. So for those of you that maybe this has piqued your interest, that you would enjoy reading this, one of the announcements that we have tonight for those who have tuned in with us live is that we are launching a book club with Revoice that you can do a weekly webinar Zoom in style. It'll be a Zoom meeting with Grant Hartley and Lauren Von Cannon are going to be the two who are leading it. And the first book that we're actually going to be reading together is Prayer in the Night. So this is going to be fun.
That's exciting.
So it's going to be the first book that we're going to be reading together. So we're going to be sending out an email tomorrow that has sign up links for several groups that we are getting ready to launch, but that's going to be one of those first 3 that we launch is a book club that's going to be reading Tish's book together. So I'm excited about that one. And there are going to be 2 others as well. One for pastors and ministry leaders who are gay and same-sex attracted. And we want to make sure that we include not just pastors, for those of us that are from complementarian traditions. If you are in any sort of ministry, parachurch ministry, if you work on a college campus, if you do youth work, whatever, anything that you would consider ministry work, we're going to have a support and fellowship group for those of us that work within churches and ministries. And then there's going to be one launching as well for people who are in mixed orientation marriages, both gay, same-sex attracted spouses and straight spouses as well, for you to be able to come as a couple and meet with other couples that are just kind of walking the same road, a similar road that you might be. So that's a preview for those of you who are watching with us live of the 3 groups that we're getting ready to launch. And included in that email as well will be dates and locations and all of that fun stuff for Revoice 21. We are going to try our hardest to meet in person this year. So we have a location and dates. So be checking your email tomorrow about that. So it's going to be fantastic. With the time that we have left, we have 2 things we want to talk about. One is to let y'all know if you have questions for Tish, there's a Q&A option down at the bottom of your screen. If you want to send in any questions that you'd like us to talk about, you can do that down there. We'll be the only people that can see those. If you want them to be anonymous, I won't say who any of the questions are from, so it will be anonymous to the people who are watching. Tish and I'll be the only ones that can see who the questions come from. But you can go ahead and put those down in the bottom and we'll look at those. And one thing that I know we wanted to have kind of to shift gears, a little bit of a pastoral moment, just talking about the last few months of what it has looked like kind of inside B world. You know, a couple of years ago, Southern Baptists issued the Nashville statement. And then last year, PCA issued a statement on sexuality. And at the beginning of this year, the ACNA joined the conservative brother and sisterhood of issuing statements on sexuality. And there's been a lot of talk around all 3 of those, but because the ACNA statement is the one that's most recent, I know that that's been particularly close to your heart, being from your church and it affecting people that you love so much. So I know that you've had some things you've wanted to share. If you want to take some time and just kind of address those things, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. So I don't have like a specific speech or agenda. I mostly want to be open to. I'm an Anglican priest. I'm an ACNA priest, and I'm on the Revoice Advisory Council, and I deeply love Side B people in my life, but also this community as a whole. Like I feel part of you, even as a straight lady. But I mean, maybe it's presumptuous. I feel like you've let me be part of you is the way to say that. But I think, so I want to be able to answer any question. I'm happy to answer 100% of any questions on this about the ACNA stuff. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, I mostly want to say, I mean, gosh, a lot of folks were really, really hurt by uh, the way this played out publicly and all the very many public statements. I do, in general, feel like public statements are kind of the worst ways to have these conversations. And I don't just mean the bishop statement, I mean, like all of these, including the Nashville statement and the other statements you brought up. Uh, and often the statements are for those, I feel like the statements are for social media, right? Like the statements are for often those outside the institutions listening in, um, uh, across the board. It's because, and I'm not saying that the bishops, I'm not trying to imply that, but anyway, the bishop statement acknowledged disagreement within the province, and I was part of that disagreement, and they know it. I was consulted. I made the argument. I asked them. I begged them not to release this, um, and uh, and I wrote I had a lot of internal conversations and institutional conversations and um, long emails with Bishop Ruck and Bishop Julian, kind of stating the case for you guys for Revoice, um, and so there was an acknowledgement of disagreement in the sense that, like, I'm still this was never an issue of like, I'm not gonna be defrocked or this is not like, there are priests that disagree with this. Um, and there still are, right? And my bishop, Todd Hunter, wrote kind of a response that pushed back on some things. And so yeah, so we're still wrestling through this. Anglicanism has slow conversations, has long conversations, right? It's but I mostly want to say there was a lot of hurt from this in the side B community, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry, um, I'm sorry for how messy and awful this played out publicly. I'm sorry for how I feel like there was just uh, um, there were just so much collateral damage and so many people hurt in the midst of it. I also want to say, honestly, if you are an Anglican celibate Christian and you feel loved and supported in your local congregation and cared for by your local pastor, to not leave over this sort of broader national stuff. Partly because this won't affect the work of your pastor or you, like you in in a local level very much at all. But also this is more, it goes back to a liturgy, the ordinary kind of conviction I have that it's really easy for this to become, for us to begin to live our lives completely in abstraction. And so and this is part of the problem of public statements, it draws lines in the sand. There's very little nuance and we all have to line up. But the reality is most of our life is lived in our sort of local congregation of people.
Right.
Most of our discipleship is with the actual people that we know and love that walk with us in life. I want the ACNA to become a place where gay celibate Christians can like absolutely flourish, can absolutely feel welcomed, can be in leadership.
Right.
But so I want that. A lot of people are working for that. And I don't know, I don't know what it's like to be gay and celibate in the ACNA right now. I don't know what it's like to be, I don't know what it's going to be like in 10 years, but I hope that it's a place where where gay celibate folks can really know Jesus, right?
Yeah.
My biggest hope for the side B folks at the end of this is that sort of on the other side of all of this Anglican wrestling stuff, um, that we would still know Jesus. Like we would, that this wouldn't cost someone their local community or cost someone their faith. That I want folks to still know Jesus if they feel loved and cared for in their own local community, to be loved and cared for in their own local community. Um, yeah, and I also just think there is the main thing I see in the ACNA is a need for long, hard conversations
Yeah.
and conversations with side B folks, like explaining like why is it important to you to call yourself a gay Christian? Like why what what does that mean to you? What are you saying
Yeah.
by that? What are you not saying by that? And I know uh, I I think one of the things we all keep in mind is that uh I'm like, as a straight person, I'm like, I can like completely walk along with these conversations, right?
Yeah.
I can move with you guys. But it's partly because I've been thinking about this since the 90s, right? Like
Right.
I went to college with Justin Lee and remember the original GCN. I remember when side
Yeah.
A and side B like happened, like when we got that language. So that means something. Like I've read a lot about the ex-gay movement and the collapse of that. I know about civil rights and watch documentaries on Stonewall Inn, and so I'm with but if you're like a 60-year-old straight dude that like has never even heard the word side B, like there's a lot of orientation that has to
Exactly.
happen for this to even to make sense.
Yeah.
And that's a burden on you guys. Like that's hard
Yeah.
to have to feel like you have to educate the church all the time. That's exhausting.
Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge that. But that is what the church needs. Like it
Yeah.
needs this education. It doesn't need sort of like public statements or like where, because people don't know where they fall yet. Like they're figuring this out. And a lot of us have had 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years trying to figure this out. Now, are there people that are going to willfully like misrepresent what you're saying? Are there people that don't want to listen? Like, of course, there's a lot, but that's not all the people that disagree with what's happening. Like, there, in other words, I think Christians in good faith can have questions and disagreement. I don't think that's entirely what we saw in the ACNA. We saw especially kind of in tweeting. We saw some cruelty, right? We saw some bad faith. And some misrepresentation. We saw that in the Baptist church. We saw that with the Nashville statement. It pains me because I'm watching it. I'm watching people I love and communities I love get hit by the left and right alike.
Yeah.
And I want to say, I'm sorry. And that's exhausting. This is part of the endurance of the mystery of pain, even is pain from the church. But I do want to say, I think that there are people in the ACNA that just genuinely don't know what they don't know. And they don't know why this is important to people. And they want to follow a Christian ethic of marriage, which is good, right?
Yeah.
They want to protect the scriptures. And so I know this is exhausting. The only thing that I can relate this to, which is not the same thing, but as being a female priest, right, is that this thing that there's folks that are just like straight up sexist and gonna be mean and be cruel. But there's folks that disagree with me, and sometimes they have good reasons. And part of my job is to like patiently walk with folks in their questions and patiently explain my story as best I can and argue from the scriptures for why I'm ordained as best I can.
Yeah.
And so it's not the same, but I do want to say, like, you guys are you're in a really hard place. and you're attacked often, and I see it, and I care, and I love you. Um, and um, and you're teaching the church,
Yeah.
and teaching implies the church has things to learn, and
Yeah.
so it's a painful um, vocation, I think, in many ways. And of course, I think the side B community is not perfect, and there's certainly ways that we can like be formed and shaped, and it's good to be questioned. But I think in
Yeah.
general, what I'm saying is that uh, these conversations need to happen. Like we need to begin to talk about why we use the language we do, or what.
Yeah.
And I think it goes. One of the reasons I was disappointed with the statement is it was so focused on language, whereas the actual stuff you deal with as a pastor, I mean, language is so low on the list of the things that like actually that you're wrestling with. Like, what does it
Yeah.
actually mean to be gay and celibate and flourish? Um, so there's a lot of pastoral questions that we need. I'm speaking as a pastor now, that we need help figuring out.
Yeah.
We need help from the side B community figuring out how to do this. And this is a relatively new conversation,
Yeah.
right? And it's not like the church has been wrestling with this for thousands of years. It has a lot to do with things the church has been wrestling with for thousands of years, like theology of sin and sanctification and grace and sexuality. But I think, what does it mean to have to be gay, to have a orientation and sub identity, not primary identity as a gay person,
Right.
but walk with Jesus faithfully. There's just a lot that we pastors have to learn, and so we need your help, and I'm grateful for Revoice.
Yeah.
So,
well, we are grateful for you and for those who are willing to be advocates and allies, and willing to learn, and willing to admit that there are things that we all need to still learn, but being willing to submit yourself to learning. That's a huge thing, that as we mutually are able to do that, I think we'll get a lot farther along in life. So we've got several good questions here. The first one I loved. This was from all the way back at the very beginning of our conversation tonight. And the question is, would this be a sitting room that Flannery O'Connor would have, but not Tish? Like how is that working?
Well,
Flannery O'Connor sitting room.
I appreciate that you think Flannery O'Connor and I are basically interchangeable, but she did live in the 50s and I do not. But I've been to Andalusia Farm.
Nice.
Visiting. I am a huge Flannery O'Connor. Obviously, whoever wrote this, is it someone I know? Because this person, obviously, I don't know who asked this.
Knows enough about you. Yeah.
But my daughter's name is Flannery, after O'Connor. So I'm a big Flannery fan. But I'm saying this for Grant if he happens to be listening. But her middle name is Day, after Dorothy Day, because I'm a huge Dorothy Day fan.
Yes.
But
he'll cry a tear for that, I'm sure.
He may not be listening, but there you go. So I don't know. I went Andalusia Farm. I don't remember if it had a southern sitting room. It probably did. Had a beautiful big porch. That's the part I adopt from Flannery. I just think
that's the best part.
All houses and churches and buildings should have enormous front porches with rocking chairs on them.
Absolutely. That's the symbol of hospitality in the South. Good question here. If we don't have an in-person friend who can teach us the Book of Common Prayer, are there good resources? So is there anything online or some place that someone can get a little bit of tutoring on how to use that book?
Yeah, that's a good question. There probably are that I don't know about in terms of just basic tutoring, but some places to start would be, there's something called Trinity Mission. You can like Google it, and it and there's a Pray As You Go app that I think has the
Yeah.
but both of them just like do the daily office, and so
Okay.
you could listen to the daily office every day from that. And there, I mean, Alan Jacobs wrote a history of the Book of Common Prayer. That's a deep dive if you want to know that. But in terms of how to use it, um, I mean, one of the easiest things I would say is if you get a Book of Common Prayer, or if you want to go to BCP Online, or that you can write ACNA 2019 Prayer Book Online. You can start by doing morning prayer, which, just like I'm saying, you can literally click on the tab morning prayer. And so start with that. The other thing you could do, my website has links to 4 different Compline services. If you go to tishharrisonwarren.com, under the prayer in the night tab, so you could start praying some Compline services. Those are some. Yeah. Oh, also, this isn't a step-by-step on how to use the Book of Common Prayer, but if you want to just generally know about Anglicanism more, there's a book Thomas Mackenzie wrote called The Anglican Compass that kind of talks about what Anglicanism is.
Yeah.
But might get into some, I actually haven't read it in a long time, so it may or may not talk about the Book of Common Prayer.
All right. Here's a great question from a straight dude like that. How do you navigate when to step in on behalf of gay folks who are exhausted from answering questions from other straight folks, and when to keep your mouth shut and let gay friends speak for themselves?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's especially hard online, because in general, I think, when do we talk about the stuff online? Like just Twitter online stuff is like just a terrible place to talk about significantly
Anything.
nuanced theological issues. And this is a nuanced theological issue.
Yeah.
And so, and it's a heart issue, right? And so it's hard to speak about in those places. So in general, I would say I don't know, and I get it wrong a lot, but I have friends I call. Like, I have specific side B friends that I call for advice about things and say, like, should I say something here, or should I not? And granted, I mean, sometimes I just get like frustrated with something Denny Burke says and I'll respond, right? And so I'm not at that point thinking like, wait, would it be better? Like, sometimes I'm not thinking through that really well. I'm just like frustrated and have responded. But man, I mean, I love it when men speak up for against misogyny, or against so if I feel like someone's being picked on, I want to say something. If it's disagreement, that's one thing, but if I feel like someone's picked on, does that make sense? I want to
Yeah, that makes sense.
say something. But there's a lot, like, if you just literally, you could spend, and I mean, you guys know this, you could spend all day every day arguing with people on Twitter and Facebook about this, and there are willing people to argue with you, and that will kill your relationship with Jesus, will kill your spiritual life.
Yeah.
And this is ultimately, like, side B Christians are going to flourish or not flourish, not based on arguments on Twitter. That's not going to be where it happens. It's going to be their own life and relationship with Jesus and local communities, but also slow institutional change. And I'm not sure Twitter helps, or social media in general helps with that. Like, social media, I would argue, in many ways makes slow institutional change harder.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the fact that there's like a side B face, like the fact that this exists is partly because there was a blog called Spiritual Friendship, right? Like, so I'm not saying there's like finding each other is a really good thing that social media has brought us, but I'm just not sure it's like a great way to arbitrate theological differences.
Yeah.
So I don't have a great answer, except that I would say I have a couple of kind of, I have like 3 go-to friends that I talk to about these things. Like, should I respond to this?
Yeah, that's smart. We have someone who is in the ACNA that is from the Diocese of Bishop Ruck. Says, I love my church, so it can be hard when we do services or events that this church or other churches in the diocese are a part of. So do you have thoughts on loving my church well, while also working through the feelings of hurt and bitterness that come along with seeing these things play out? So
Yes.
how do we love and serve our individual congregations well, while still trying to deal with the bigger denominational issues?
Gosh, I love this question so much.
Yeah.
And I want to thank the person for it. I could have like an hour-long conversation with them.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I identify with this. Like, I don't, again, like I don't have the same story, but I like, there are certain priests who like regularly call for my discipline, right? Like, I was compared in the last few weeks to Bishop Spong. So it was by a lay person, but it was published, right, in the ACNA.
Yeah.
So
I LOL'd at that.
So what I'm saying is I totally have been hurt. I've been hurt by people that like who like that personally who were trying to hurt me, right?
Yeah.
And so but I do. I love my local church, and I love not just my local church. There's a lot of Anglican priests that I'm dear friends with and love deeply, and some of my very, very best friends. So I have had that I've lived that awkward thing of like being in a church event with another church or provincial assembly, and you're like in a room or at a table, and you're like, I know very specifically horrible things that you have said or about me. So when to bring that up or when to talk about it, all of that, it's very hard. Here's what I would say. I mean, well, going back to Flannery O'Connor, she said, at times we suffer as much from the church as for it. Yeah. The only thing that makes it endurable is that this is the body of Christ, and on this we are fed, right? That there's this sense that remembering that Jesus loves his church more than we do. Yeah. He is in charge of sanctifying it and purifying it, not us. I'm glad to hear this person loves their local church. But I do think there, and I know, I mean, this may be hard to hear from a straight person, and you don't have to receive it from me, but I'm saying it honestly because of the scriptures. But is that we're called to forgive, right? And we're called to continue. I'm not talking about an abusive situation. I'm not talking, if you feel like you are being abused in your local church, like find a new one. But I think that like we will all leave our churches if we can't forgive those who hurt us in our denominations. Like none of us will be left. And I've had, what I have been praying recently is that Jesus would heal this hurt enough that I walk in the Holy Spirit and not walk in reaction to my hurt. And so I think that's our challenge, is that not to react to the hurt we feel from other people, but to react to Jesus and to who he is, and walk in the Spirit in that. I know Bishop Ruck. I haven't talked to him extensively. Honestly, like 90% of what we've talked about is this stuff. Yeah. But he wasn't rude. Like he was open to hearing. He was kind. So I think, I don't know if you can have a conversation with him or not. I don't even know if that would be beneficial, honestly, if he's not your own pastor. Maybe I wouldn't recommend that, actually. But if you need to, maybe. But here's what I'm saying. I think we work to forgive. Now, does forgiveness mean reconciliation with everyone? I don't think so. And
Yeah.
I think if someone's unwilling to hear you, unwilling to repent for the ways they've hurt you, unwilling to, or the ways they've wronged you, the unwilling to care about your experience of the world, um, then yeah, maybe we can't be in relationship with them.
Right.
But I still think that that forgiveness and being able to see our enemy as our brother is just part of what it means to be a Christian.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
whoever you are. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a good one as far as accessing. Somebody asked, how do you get the Book of Common Prayer? There's a website. I know it is available just in general. You can get it online.
BCP Online or the ACNA 2019 prayer book is also entirely available online.
Yeah, so those are available there. If somebody wanted to purchase an actual hard copy, any online bookstore has it, does it? Yeah. Say I found mine in a thrift store, so you can always go do that. Last question that we'll get here, and then there are a couple of you that I see your questions, and I may just email responses to you. I'm looking at you, Rob, on your question, so I'll email you the answer to that one. This last one we'll get to here with everyone so that we are keeping our time commitment. As someone who has experienced being under attack, what would you recommend for those of us who want to continue thriving and growing in our faith while getting lots of criticism from people claiming to speak on behalf of Jesus? So how do you keep serving the church well when the church keeps attacking you?
Yeah. So, I'd have to hear more of the nature of the attack. Is this your local congregation? Is this online? I think we all need to be really careful about limiting our online intake and limiting our online arguments about this stuff. Because it's like human beings weren't meant to have like that many people able to comment on your life, right? On your thoughts without knowing you or loving you. But I would say, like, I have a crew. Like, I have people that have my back, and I have their back. And there's and that crew isn't just side B people. That it's like all sorts of folks, but there are some side B folks in it, and I would die. I mean, I would go to the mat for these people if they said, you know, I need you to say this publicly. I need you, like, I would do it. But so what am I saying? Sorry, but they would do the same for me, right? Yeah. And so I think, like, particularly if you are someone under attack, or if you're part of a community, if you're part of Revoice and feel under attack, to have people in your life that love you and encourage you, that you have their back and they have yours. That's really helpful. I also think, I mean, man, like, I do just really think we need local embodied communities of discipleship that are caring for us, that are supporting us. And we, like, side B folks need that too. Like, I'm glad that you have Revoice. I'm glad you have the side B Facebook page, which I always want to be part of and I'm not allowed to be. But I want, but also, like, you need people in your actual life, like you're embodied human beings to walk through this stuff with. I've maybe this is like COVID brain from my shot today, but I'm like fading, but so I feel like I'm not being articulate, and I'm sorry. But
no, that was
so
articulate.
Embodied. Thanks. And having people, like, to some, and then I mean, I do think, like, to have conviction in America today means you have to have a pretty tough skin.
Yeah.
And I mean that from the left and the right. Like, we can't be fearful. And we have to be able to sort of, uh, like, these people that I'm saying, like, comparing me to Spong or whatever, like, to some extent, it's like they don't matter to me, like, they don't know
Yeah.
me, and the people that do know me, um, it know my sin much deeper than they do. That's the thing. I'm not
Yeah.
saying, like, the people that do know me know I'm perfect, right? It's like,
Right.
no, I'm much worse than those people think I'm
Yeah.
much worse than my internet trolls think I am.
Yeah.
Probably in different ways than they think I am, but I am much worse. I'm much more in need of Jesus's grace.
Yeah.
But I am so much more deeply loved than they know. And God is at work in my life in ways they don't know. And so you
Yeah.
need people there that
Yeah.
know what a big sinner you are. They're not impressed by you and they're not offended by you. They just freaking love you
Yeah.
and want you to know Jesus and want and they come to know Jesus through you.
Yeah.
And so we need that, and to limit the intake of some of that, like, there's a lot you just shouldn't listen to because it
Yeah.
doesn't matter and they don't know you and they don't have power over your life. And they don't have the only power they have is what you give them.
Yeah.
Um and it's different if they have power over your life, right? It's different if it's your bishop. But
Yeah.
that's why I would have to know kind of a little more. But ultimately, um, the things that will keep us rooted are the scriptures, our local embodied community helping discipling us, our deep times of silence and prayer, especially if you're under attack. Silence and prayer are just absolutely essential. I mean, you read through the Psalms and he's like constantly under attack, right?
Yeah.
Jesus, I mean, constantly under attack by all different factions, right? The Pharisees and the Romans, and there's like everyone's after him, right?
Yeah.
Um and demanding an answer from him. And he just constantly retreats. He just constantly goes and is retreats and is alone and prays.
Yeah.
And then people find him and he runs away again and retreats into prayer. So I'm not telling you, I mean, I'm saying, like, go to church, pray, read the scriptures, which is what your like 2 year old, second grade or whatever, your Sunday school could have told you when you're 2 years old. But that's it. There's not like a secret,
Yeah.
not a secret chamber of the Christian life. Like, that's it. But particularly if you're under attack, I think having people who know you and love you, um, being humble, like, I know that sounds like the opposite of what it seems like with attack. You need, like, you need to feel good about yourself. But I do think humility of saying, like, um, of being able to receive reproof, but from those who deeply love us, right?
Yeah.
That's the key, is like not the internet trolls, but like from the
Exactly.
actual people in your life is really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, and especially if it's stuff that's going on online. One of my favorite people to follow on Twitter has been Grant Hartley, mainly because I love the incredibly positive and gracious way that he interacts with people who troll him. Yeah, people get on there and are like, praying for your eternally damned soul for gay blah, they're just completely going off on him, just tearing him up, and he replies with, yes, please pray for my soul, I need all the prayer I can get. And he and Greg Coles does that as well, that they are so encouraging to me, to remind me that we don't have to dish it back, that we can just say, you know what, the more prayers the better, thank you so much for praying for my soul, I really do appreciate that. And
Yep.
just knowing when to walk away.
Yep.
It's good stuff. Well, Tish, thank you so much for spending the evening with us, even if as you are recovering from your
Yeah, I'm
COVID
like
vaccine.
COVID drunk, guys. Like,
Yeah.
I said this on Twitter, but I've been like super out of it all day. So thank you. I'm sorry. If
Yeah.
I'm less articulate than normal, know that it's that I'm just trying to, it's
the fog.
COVID. Yeah.
It's the fog. Well, we appreciate you spending the evening with us. And I've had friends ask if I was excited about tonight. I was like, I'm just excited I get to talk to Tish for an hour and a half. It's cool that other people are going to be watching, but it's just nice to have a conversation with a friend.
Yes.
So thank you so much. And this will cut off, but I'm going to send you an email, and we've got some questions that we could not get to. So hopefully we can chat about it and maybe do like a short follow-up video or something that we could get to some of those other questions.
I would love that. That would be great. Let's do it.
Thank you so much, guys. We appreciate it. Signing off here from Revoice Deep Dive. Check your email tomorrow for the announcements that we have coming up, and we will see y'all next month. Thanks.